Welcome everyone. Massive crowd. Great to see everyone. It's huge turnout for today. So we're going to go through the parents' guide for kids and teens with strength training, weight training. The reason why we kind of came up with this topic or area, I think it's really misunderstood the value of strength training and really what it brings to kids in their development. And we're going to go through some of those main points, but we're also going to go into further details in terms of sport performance, well-being, from a physical perspective as well, from the underweight, overweight, but then some actual strategies on how to, one, get them started, but two, keep them in there as well. And we'll have, because this is a smaller group today, we'll have a bit more of a discussion style as well. So we can talk about certain points if someone's you guys got something relevant to add to the conversation today. It's really just a PD session for these guys and mum as well. You guys know me, but so obviously owner, head strength coach and an athlete, over 8 years experience, worked with youth organisations to talent, what we call more like sporting academies as well in various sports. Be able to have the privilege to work one-on-one with a lot of kids that have gone overseas or be able to go professionally as well. But also be able to work at over in the US, even having a bit of experience playing semi-professional sports, more work in youth mentoring than anything else. But then, being able to work with hundreds of youth athletes to get fitter, stronger, and faster for whatever it may be, whether it's just for a health perspective or whether it's more performance-based perspective as well. So, I guess we'll quickly go around the room and what are the beliefs around strength training for kids and teens. So we'll kind of talk about what are the misconceptions, and I guess we'll get everyone to throw the hat and the name into the ring. Anyone have any thoughts or beliefs around it? Strength training for kids or teens?
There's a lot of worries around it in the public, in terms of that people strength training starts growth, that they'll get injured, all that sort of stuff. It's out there at the moment.
Yep.
Which are all myths.
And a lot of parents will think of the extremes of it as well. Of obviously, the powerlifting, weightlifting, 200-300 kilo weights on their back, and they just think the kids are going to crumble. It's it's not really exactly like that. Anything else? Yeah.
But I believe it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's like.
I encourage strength training, but they need to know what to do.
Yeah.
Do it the right way.
It's like drinking water. We know it's good, but too much water is actually bad for us. It's like anything, right? Everything in the right amount of dosage is relatively going to be safe for us, and strength training is no exception to that rule. And unfortunately, social media does play a bigger role than ever before, and people. I think there's a Instagram page called Strong by Science or something like that, Stronger by Science, and he actually talks about a lot of the younger kids that go on social media. They'll see what these athletes are doing, like these extreme plyometrics, jumps and all that jazz, and lifting heavy weights, and the kids will go straight to that rather than seeing how they actually got there and seeing the actual journey of what they took to get to that point. No kid will become professional in 2 weeks' time. It's just never going to happen. All right. So why are we presenting on this topic? I think in the last 18 months, we've seen a huge decline in physical activity. The obvious reason is COVID. The lockdowns really did play a big role, but we've seen the increase in screen time as well. So we've seen, obviously, the screen time went up because school went online, but we're not really seeing much of a decline in screen time as a result to pre-pandemic levels as well. We're actually seeing the injury rate in sport go up. What was actually quite interesting, because swimming lessons weren't happening, they actually saw a greater case number of drownings. Yeah. So, and this is kind of the same principle is we take it away, we're going to see an increase somewhere else, unfortunately. We're seeing a development of poor habits around physical and mental health. So going, social media, video gaming, just a lot of screen time, trying to disconnect from what's going on and trying to submerge themselves into that world. Also, we're seeing a lack of time due to commitment. So a lot of kids now have more commitments than ever. School seems to be the real big thing that kids are focusing on. And I think it's good that they're focusing on, but like anything, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing and more detrimental to them. So we do see around exam times, kids' mental health does take a bit of a hit, a bit of a toll. Then obviously school holidays come around, but unfortunately, it does take quite a while for them to get back into being their normal selves as a result. And during that time, we can actually see a decline in positive habits or behaviours. So if they go to sleep at a normal time, like 9:30, 10 o'clock, they could be spending more time later, which means they're waking up later, probably skipping breakfast, going to more high sugary foods for quicker bursts of energy, and it just becomes like this absolute hamster wheel that they're stuck in. Parents at schools are confused on how to best improve physical fitness in a way that creates long-term engagement. Now, I think this is a really important point because I get where schools' perspectives are. Obviously, there's budgets involved and money, and there's bureaucracy within the schools. The problem we have at the moment is we kind of lose perspective of why do we have schools in the first place. Part of the point of having schools in the first place is actually give kids the basic skills in order to go thrive in life. And unfortunately, I don't think some schools are really doing a good job at that. And if they are, they're probably allowing some kids to slip through the cracks as well. So there has to be a myriad of ways on how we're keeping kids engaged. And physical fitness is really one of those easy ways to do it, as long as it's a sustainable system. Over in America, a lot of high school programs, they really push school sports to be their big thing. It's their big community connector. I feel like it's kind of done well in some schools, and it's kind of in some other schools where it's focused purely on academics or more so on academics. You're missing a big picture where it becomes more about competition between each other, where it should be more competition with yourself of getting better. And sports and training or physical fitness is a great way of actually doing that as well. Because what happens when they get to year 11, year 12, the ATAR becomes their thing, and it's a competition between each other. It's a ranking system rather than actually ranking themselves on how well have they progressed. And we're also seeing a decrease in well-being and self-care, and that kind of link back into all the other elements as well. It's funny because when we saw a decrease in well-being and self-care, all those mindful apps came out, like No Tomorrow, like the sales went up. So it just becomes like a massive super compensation to the actual issues at play. The state government's pumped millions of dollars now into these services as well in order to help kids, but they're good, but they still don't create the traction needed to get them off these programs as well. So today we're going to go through a quick overview. So we're going to discuss the importance of strength training for kids and teens for sports performance, self-confidence, personal development and well-being, injury prevention. We're going to go through sporting related and postural related because I don't think postural related really gets enough attention. We're seeing more and more kids develop poor posture, and they're actually almost more developed than kids back in like the 1960s or the 1970s. Whilst then, technology wasn't really a thing, and basically your form of communication was right into your mate's place to actually talk to them and actually say, hey, you want to come out, shoot some hoops or something. Now it's just like, 30 seconds you can get an instant response. It's all the developing healthy habits leading to adulthood, issues around body image, and we'll kind of debunk some common myths throughout the whole process as well. So, and the learning intentions for parents or for yourself today is understand the role strength training can play in various aspects of your kids' or teens' life. So from physical development, sports performance, well-being, effect on schooling and education, long-term physical participation. So that's from finishing school to end of life, essentially. Then creating routine and structure. I think this is where kids or parents want kids to have routine and structure, and unfortunately COVID really turned that on its head. The nice thing about strength training, it does create routine and structure, because in order to get progressively better, you have to follow the structure. And lastly, understand the strength coach's youth fitness specialist role when it comes to help develop kids and teens. We'll talk about that term in a second. What is a strength coach's role? So anyone just want to chuck your hands up and throw some terms out, or what?
Supervision.
Yeah?
Preparing the athlete, the physical abilities of the athlete for their sport.
Yep. You have anything, Mum?
Yeah, it's educate God.
Yeah. Anything?
I just wanted to say coach.
Yeah.
Because the coach says this is the way, and they step back and they let the child do it and correct where there's some correction that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's just, if they're slowly walking off the wrong track, just give them a little nudge. Just do that a little bit differently. Cool. Yeah, that was pretty much it. Probably go a little bit more detail into it. So what do we do aside from teach exercises? And I think this is a real critical point that a lot of parents don't get. We're so much more than teaching kids exercises. And this is kind of where parents are like, oh, how much do you charge? And kind of like, how much, oh, this person charges, $5 less per week. And it becomes like this battle to the bottom when it comes to coaching, rather than actually seeing the actual value of what a strength coach or a youth fitness specialist provides. So simple ones: role model, idol, someone where kids and teens can look up to. The reason why they come here is like some kids want to be as strong as Dave one day. Well, there you go. That's a role model right there. What does he do? How can they emulate some of his behaviors and actually take that on board as well? Someone to talk to about awkward or hard issues that young people feel parents cannot help with. And I think this is a really important point, because there's such a generational gap. I'll say there's almost two generations really. And the good thing about, I guess, coaches who are in the early, mid to late 20s is we kind of cross the chasm between more analog to digital to the social world. I think parents still find it hard and still bring their own beliefs of how things should be into this modern day world. And it makes it really difficult to connect. So when you got someone who can speak the lingo of a teen, it just makes it so much more easier, but they do have a little bit more life experience as well. So that makes it just a little bit easier for them to connect. And plus, because they've got a bit more life experience, they can ask more questions like, I'm struggling with this, what do you suggest? We inspire, coach and educate them on nutrition, sleep, overcome adversity, creating daily structure and goal setting. I think if the kids can't get through these, I think they're going to really struggle with school, because then they just kind of just go through school without any purpose. We want to not tell them what the purpose is. We want them to actually discover it for themselves. Then probably the most important thing is calling them out when they're doing something or display a behavior that isn't beneficial for them in the long term. Kids have rose-colored glasses on majority of the time. They really don't know when they've actually slipped up or potentially are going to slip up down the track as well. So part of our role or job is to kind of, hey, we need to pull you back. You're doing too much, you're going to burn yourself out. This is the potential repercussions of what's going to happen if you continue down this road. So having that honest, frank conversation with them can actually lead them to going on the right track. But then we also help to talk to them, what do they think the solution is as well. So we're not telling them what to do, they can actually figure it out. And this is, I think, part of the issue is kids aren't really learning how to figure things out. Like, they're not learning through discovery as such. I'd say we're more youth fitness specialists than anything else. And this is a term that Nathan gave to me, which he found from an expert, Avery Fagenbaum. Did he coin the term? I think this really encompasses who we are. We work with youth, we work with fitness, but we specialise working in those two domains when we put them together. The nice thing about this term is strength and conditioning coach, people don't really understand what strength and conditioning is. People understand what fitness is. They understand what youth is. When you merge them together, it's like, oh, you work with youth and get them fitter. That's pretty much it. Then all the info today is in the context where you have the kid or teen has an experienced coach or youth fitness specialist coaching them throughout their sessions. Now, this is a critical point because when kids do their own training by themselves, whether it's through social media, YouTube, whatever it may be, they kind of go off the cuff. And when they go off the cuff, they have the potential for injury, lack of progress, demotivation, not measuring progress. So it's a nice way to actually guide them and actually teach them. We're like teachers, essentially. Let's go through strength training. So just the real basics. We can cover this off really quickly. Is the performance or physical exercise designed to improve muscular strength, power, size, and endurance? There's many ways that we can do this. So machines, weights, barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, body weight, calisthenics, power bands, and a lot of parents don't understand sports training is a very poor development of strength because it's not specifically targeting, or it's not actually overloading the muscles in the correct fashion that we want to see. And that's why a lot of parents get wrong. It's like, oh, they just play more sport. It doesn't mean they're going to get stronger. What does it look like for kids and teens? I'll play this little video. Oh. Oops. So it's just a little snapshot of what it looks like for kids and teens. So we've got some various exercises going on. Obviously we've got Hunters and El Marie in there as well. We're doing some strength-based work, very controlled fashion, but also get some power development with Josh as well. So this is just a few elements of what actually goes into a program for a teen, or even a kid in this case. Oh, there we go. Cool. So we're going to go through the different elements. So physical development. The changes we see with kids is the growth spurt, the fish growing about 18 to 20 years old for boys and 17 to 19 years old for girls. What we do see when they do go through puberty is a clumsiness or lack of muscular coordination and control. So you get a kid to stand on one foot, an adult can do it pretty comfortably, no real wobble or anything like that. And if you get a kid who's going through puberty, they're just like, it's like a breeze is coming through to almost blow them over. And the reason why we see this is they haven't really adapted to their new body. When it comes to strength training, we can actually strengthen them up to actually be able to adapt to the new body as well. Load them up in ways that will actually enable them to hold their position better if we're trying to train that. We see increases in physical strength, also in weight, and kids' brains are malleable, so neuroplasticity. So for those who didn't know, if you're going to teach a kid a new language, between the ages of 2 and 7 is actually the best time to do it because they're very plastic at that stage, or the brains are. But also when it comes to movement patterns as well. So kids can develop movement patterns really quickly and be able to maintain those because it becomes hardwired as they practice. But this is where they can actually learn bad habits as well, and it can actually stick if it's not actually addressed during this time. But when they get to adulthood, then it becomes a little bit difficult. We're also going to consider kids and teens are not miniature adults. So when it comes to programming, we don't want them to do adult programs. And this is where parents are like, oh yeah, I'll just bring my son along and he'll just do the same thing. It doesn't really work like that, unfortunately. They cannot withstand the same training volumes adults can. So basically an adult plan are usually unstable for kids and teens and have different demands as well. With adults, they're a lot more developed, so their skeletal structure is more developed, their strength is a lot higher as well. Their coordination is going to be a lot higher. With kids, it's a little bit different. They're all over the shop. You've got to create a lot of stability for them. So they're trying to figure out their bodies, whilst adults, they've got that under control. And they can, like I said before, they can develop negative motor patterns and but they can unlearn them quickly. With adults, it takes longer. Strength training does not stunt their growth. Malnutrition stunts their growth. If anyone says strength training stunts their growth, just look at like countries in Africa or something like that. Malnutrition really does stunt their growth. That's from an evidential point of view. But now there's more evidence coming out to say pure plant-based diets are actually more detrimental than an omnivore diet when it comes to growth. The physical development. So when it comes to strength training and kids and teens doing strength training, we see a lot of changes. I think one of the big ones is the ability to build stronger bones. Peak bone strength peaks at 25 to 30. A lot more important for females as well. As soon as for females, after menopause, bone mineral density can drop quite quickly. Improves muscular coordination, overall body awareness. So if they're playing a sport and that's a lot more open, as in you got defenders, you got a ball, and you're moving in multiple directions, they'll have a lot more control and awareness of their body during that time. Reduce the risk of lifestyle-related diseases. Now, there's an interesting stat. The year, I can't remember exactly, but the year that you finish school or drop out of school will determine whether or not you participate in physical activity, which can have a correlation in terms of lifestyle-related diseases later on down the track. So that's an interesting just observation of what's happening. So the longer they're in school, the more likely they're actually to look after their health, if that makes sense. But we actually do reduce the risk of diabetes, cancer, coronary heart disease, etc. So we're really trying to set the kids up, not just for the short term, for sports and just get them strong and feeling good, but for the long term as well. Drives up hunger, so helpful for underweight teens, and we'll talk about that in a second, or a little bit later. Improves sleep quality and quantity. A lot of the kids here, they'll train, they'll have something to eat, and they'll pretty much nod off to sleep afterwards. It helps to increase a compound in our brain, which enables us to actually feel like we're tired, which will enable us to get a good sleep, or should enable us. Reduce the risk of injury, so that are activity and sporting related as well, and create neural pathways favourable for long-term physical health as well. So if we're teaching them to move well at a young age, they're less likely to experience pain or in the lower back, hips or knees later on down the track as well. I'm just going to turn this off, it's a bit warm. I'm cooking. Let's go into sports performance. So majority of sports require the following characteristics: upper and lower body strength, power and speed, specific size or shape, coordination, cardiovascular fitness. This is a really interesting one: robustness and body armor. So it actually helps to resist the impacts, hits and knocks. So it's basically, if you're going to be in a car, if you had a choice, if you know you're going to be in a car crash, would you rather a Toyota Echo or would you rather a Land Cruiser? You'd rather be in the Land Cruiser. You can be pretty safe and be fine. The Echo would be like a crushed can, essentially. So that's actually something interesting. So the stronger they are, the more robust they are, the more resilient they are as well. And also sort of repeatability of effort. So with sport isn't just one hard effort. There are lots of mini efforts throughout the whole time. They can sustain their efforts for the whole time or be a lot more consistent throughout the time and less like to peter off. When fatigue increases throughout a match, whether it's football, soccer, basketball, then we start to increase the likelihood of injury as well. So when fatigue's high, increase the likelihood of that. What does the data say? So when it comes to strength training in teens, we see a 5 to 10% improvement in sprint times. We see a decrease in change of direction times and increase in jumping performances. So really just getting stronger, we start to improve on a lot of sporting performance outcomes. So as I mentioned before, so everything on this slide, strength training improves, but also the tolerance to training load. Now, this is probably really not understood by a lot of sporting coaches. when we get someone stronger or we reach their ideal strength level, we can actually throw more training load at them. So whether it's more training sessions, more intensity bouts, more sprints or whatever it may be, we can throw more at them and they can actually recover adequately as well. And I think that's really important because we don't have kids strength training, but coaches will just flog their athletes like no tomorrow. And what we're seeing now is kids just breaking down. So what have we got? Like shin splints, lower back issues, Achilles tendon, patella tendon issues, just all the injuries we see just from too much, too soon as well. And also the faster ability to recover from training and competition. So the stronger they are, we increase their strength reserve, which increases their ability to actually recover faster as well. So that's actually a real interesting one. And that's why we want to get everyone to a certain level of strength before we really get competition going for them. But also decreases likelihood of impact injuries, likelihood of overuse injuries, mentioned before, likelihood of burnout, and this is super common in individual sports. So when we're looking at individual sports, we're looking more specifically at endurance-based sports where training load is still monitored, but we get a lot of issues that can come with that as well. So track and field, cycling, rowing, and swimming are like your main ones for that one. Then a lack of strength is a big indicator of the likelihood of injury. All kids and teens need a minimal base level of strength, and this will vary from athlete to athlete as well. So it depends on the sport, depends on the individual, and depends on their position as well. So not everyone, you don't need everyone to squat, 2 times body weight. It's not necessary, but they should be at a certain level for their sport where they can recover well, but also perform well as well. That's the critical part. Injury prevention. So the mechanism from injury is the inability for the tissues, muscles, bones, tendons, and ligaments to tolerate load it's placed under. So what that really means is, so if I do a lot of jumping work and it gets to the point where my Achilles tendon really starts to become really sore, almost like a real strain, that means the mechanism of injury is I've done too much work through that tissue. So that's really just the overuse component, but this can actually happen from other ways, from actual impact. So tackling is usually a really good one for the hard hit, so a high intensity hit, but also non-impact and overload, so muscular strains. So we're talking about hamstrings. What other tears are there? Pec tears. Pec tears is another one. Rotator cuff. I know people have strained the rotator cuff as well. But also ligament ruptures as well. So ACL is the stereotypical one as well. They're the 3 main types when it comes to injuries in sport and activities. The next one I'm going to talk about is posture in terms of injury prevention. Obviously, the last 18 months, posture has just gone to trash. Kids are sitting more, just too much screen time. That really means that the kids and teens' posture has been affected in a real negative way. Now, if they're constantly sitting like this, which is okay, and we're doing ways of actually getting them back into this position, then it's actually not the worst thing in the world. But when you've got too much of one thing and not enough of another thing, that's when we're in trouble. With kids, as I mentioned before, they're actually quite, very clumsy and also very malleable. But if they're stuck in this position, we continue to reinforce that position over time as well. And it becomes harder to change as they get older and when the structures become a lot stiffer as well. So long-term issues can cause posture-related pain in the near and distant future if not addressed. So we've had one of our members here. He's been studying for 7 years and he used to just sit down and get pain for studying for 2 hours or longer, and just like sharp shooting pains through his neck. So it does need to be addressed. If you're going to study for long periods of time, we need ways to address that as well. Like I said, too much of one thing is a really bad thing. So when the load of the tissue, when we load the tissue in a systematic and gradual fashion, so strength training, the tissue can tolerate more load over time. So if I'm doing a lot of jumps over time, obviously I'm going to be breaking down the fibers in the Achilles, but also want to be able to strengthen those fibers as well to be able to tolerate more load over time, thus reducing the risk of injury through that site. And actually, if it does occur, it actually reduces the severity of what as well. So the stronger the person is, if they sustain an injury, they're less likely, or they have less time on the sideline as a result. So recover faster. Let's kind of change the pace up a little bit as well. So we're going to talk about well-being. So we kind of talk about the most obvious stuff, but we haven't really talked about the real stuff that's actually affecting youth or kids and teens today. So we're going to talk a little bit about well-being and how it relates to strength training as well. So the definition of well-being is really a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. And now, the pandemic was labelled as a national crisis for youth, for young people. 1/3 of young people reported very high levels of distress, which is obviously a concerning sign. Especially if we've got chronic distress, that is a really bad sign as well. And what that does is, when we got these worldwide things happening, it basically, all the attention's on things that they can't control. So that's what we've seen. So the bushfires, yes, we know bushfires is a factor that we have within Australia. Extreme weather, we know that's a factor within Australia. The lockdowns, obviously not even within our radar, weren't even within our radar. And obviously worldwide unrest. So a lot of kids and teens, their attention is really pushed outwards, and we've got to try and bring it back, the focus onto them. I think that's really going to be, especially our agenda for an athlete moving forward, is bring it back onto them, create some individual accountability moving forward with them. Adolescence is a time of developing self-identity and interact with the outside world. So there's 3 phases when it comes to growth. The first phase is like a baby, toddler, child, is the child, they're totally dependent on the parent. As they get older and older, they want to develop some level of independence. Then we get to the phase where the child, who's maybe in their 20s or 30s, can actually be dependable to look after someone else. So that whole cycle just transfers across to the next generation, and so on and so forth. This is probably the concerning thing, is we're too focused on the literal stuff, the material stuff in the world, and we're not focused on the internal world of the individual developing at this time. So the lack of developing peer connections and exploring outside is distressing. So it's made it a lot harder for kids to connect these days, be able to communicate these days. Yeah, social media, technology has made it a little bit easier, but it's going to be harder for kids to make genuine connections. Stefan, one of our members, said, being able to have a call over the like a game or Zoom or something like that is not the same as having face to face. You don't get to experience the real emotion that's actually behind that. It can be a bit tone deaf, a bit stonewalled in that regard. So there is a large push in the mental health space, and strength training can become a strong tool to develop oneself and improve individual outcomes. So the nice thing, I'll go on to the next part. The nice thing is about strength training, it challenges them differently from the way sport does. With sport, it's competition with others. Even though at the early ages, development about themselves, unfortunately the way sports coaches are looking at things, it's a win at all costs mentality at the moment. The nice thing about strength training is competition in comparison to oneself. So you compare yourself to what you were last month to this month, last session to this session, and then they can actually begin to develop themselves and ask questions like, why aren't I training as well as I did last time? All right, probably went to bed too late, didn't have breakfast, so on and so forth. And that actually creates self-improvement because they're learning through discovery of who they are and about themselves. And then they can actually implement or be able to talk to a coach and actually be able to problem solve these areas in order to move forward in what their endeavor is or whatever they want to achieve. I'll keep moving forward. Yeah, so strength training. So we see some real positive outcomes. So self-belief, self-efficacy, regulates mood. I think this is a really interesting one. Obviously, like with year 9s and with females in year 9, it seems to be the magical age where the world just completely changes. It seems to be at every school, really. Yeah. Strength training becomes a really powerful tool to regulate the mood. So we see increase in neurotransmitters. Serotonin is one of those feel-good hormones from exercise. It also improves eating patterns as well. Kids are more conscious about the way they look, the way they feel, the way they project themselves on the peers as well. I know I was self-conscious growing up as well. And strength training really does help to boost individuals' morale at the end of the day. It provides a daily structure, and I think this is really important. Is if kids and teens want to get better in the gym, lift weights, get stronger, bigger, faster, and all that, it has to incorporate everything they do outside as well. So this forces them, if they want to get better in here or better in their sport, they have to create structure. But also it creates structure where there's actual purpose behind it. They're not creating structure for the sake of creating structure. There's an actual drive and meaning or why behind it. And then sleep quality as well. A lot of the kids that do train here, their sleep has actually changed for the better as well. So we're physically exerting them. And this increases a compound called adenosine. And adenosine increases our sleep pressure. When we increase our sleep pressure, it increases the likelihood of us going to sleep at a specific time as well. So, and that's one of the reasons why we need kids to actually be physically active as well, is because we need that increase in sleep pressure in order to get them to sleep and stay asleep as well. And improve self-care and improve self-empowerment. It's what it really equals at the end of the day when it comes to strength training, because they're in the gym to improve themselves. They're the ones doing the work. You want bigger arms, they're trying to get bigger, try and improve their arms. Underweight. So I don't think this really it does get spoken about, but it's not really like a big issue, and I think it's going to start to become more of an issue as well. So when it comes to underweight kids, it's not meeting the energy needs for overall development and daily energy needs. So as I mentioned before, if the kid is malnourished, or we're going to see an actual stagnation in their growth, or slowing down their rate in growth. And it can actually lead to some implications later on. So if they're undersized in sport, more likely to sustain injuries in contact sports. Very evident in football, soccer, but even basketball as well. Technically it's not a contact sport, but it is. Netball, it isn't, but it is. The stronger they are, the more likelihood they'll perform better, and more likelihood they're going to enjoy it, because they're actually like, hey, I'm getting positive outcomes out of this. It's great. The risk of burnout and overtraining. So if we've got a bad combination of first of all, the underweights, not eating enough, the training load is way too much for what the body can withstand, we're just going to burn the kid out. And unfortunately, this does kind of happen with endurance sports, as I mentioned before, but it also happens with a lot of professional high-level or national programs, and there's a few more horror stories coming out, unfortunately, where the athletes are burnt out from too much training load, therefore they're less likely to eat because their bodies are stressed out, so therefore it continues to reinforce and keeps them in the hamster wheel as a result. And there are always indicators of when that is actually happening as well. The nice thing is, strength training increases our appetite. It actually increases ghrelin, which is the hormone that actually that gives us that hunger, or that appetite. Increases the likelihood of increasing food intake. With the increase in food intake and regular strength training, we begin to see incremental changes in their body weight. Pretty simple. But in terms of the amount of training we want to see, if they're not doing any strength training, let's just start really basic, twice a week. If they're already doing some sport, twice a week or 3 times a week, maybe start with 1 session a week. Most kids do feel hungry after their training here. Sometimes some Some kids don't actually feel hungry after the sports training, which is actually quite interesting as well. Now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. So if the kid is overweight, strength training increases the amount of muscle mass and decreases the amount of body fat. The increase in activity increases the caloric expenditure. This also can have a positive effect on dietary and sleep behaviors as well, but this also needs to be in conjunction with a calorie-controlled diet also. I think a lot of people try and think exercise is the remedy or the be-all and end-all, and it's part of the process. Diet really is. Diet does play a huge factor within this whole process. But then if kids do understand what they're eating and how much they're eating, but also with strength training as well, we can begin to control that as well. But if there are other issues beyond that, then obviously seeing a GP, going to a dietitian, is going to be critical for long-term success. Cool. So what do you do next? So since we've got all this information, what's the actual process of helping the young ones out for the long-term success if they have one of these issues or one or more of these issues actually that we've gone through? There are a few ways you can go about this. Taking into consideration, the focus should be long-term development. Short-term outcomes can help drive this process. So if we want a kid to gain 10 kilos, okay, we're not going to gain 10 kilos in a year. We're probably going to gain it over a couple of years. If they're like 13 or 14 years old, okay, we're going to push to get 2 kilos in the next 6 months. So what are the things we need to do to drive that process, and what do we need to do to actually break it down even further from there? Specialization should be avoided like the plague in early years of sport and development. Specialization should occur at roughly the age of 15 years old. I was going through some research yesterday, and they said kids that specialized too early only made national level. They weren't able to go any further, but those who peaked a lot later on were actually able to make it professional, which was actually quite interesting. So the longer we delay it, the greater the outcomes we actually see. So what we actually encourage here, if kids play like a summer and winter sport, so there might be footy during the winter, might be basketball or I don't know, tennis during the summer. They're developing different muscle groups, different skills that become transferable as well. And then we see positive outcomes when it comes to sporting performance in regard, but also decreases likelihood of burnout as well. So if you consistently play one sport for from 6 to 15, more than likely you're going to burn out, you're not going to enjoy it, and you're going to drop it. You're going to move on from that. Swimming is one of those stereotypical ones, but it's good to see that some of the swimmers here do other activities outside as well. So we're very happy to see that. Unstructured play, I think this doesn't get enough credit. I think, especially when I was younger, you just ride around the streets, go to the skate park, do whatever you wanted to. You just had fun just through discovery. A lot of these kids these days, it's very structured. You have this at this time, you got to go this at this time, this and this time. So there's a lot of running around. So I would actually start to allocate for parents actually more unstructured outside time. All right, you got an hour, don't even come in the house, go shoot some hoops or something like that. I think that has a lot more value than they actually start to discover things. Then they might end up taking up a sport that they particularly didn't have much of an interest in. And it's like, oh, I'm actually not too bad at this. And because there's parklands, there's basketball courts now, and in some places have table tennis as well. Like outdoor table tennis. Yeah.
In the morning, they've got like big ass wall, like tennis again, like basketball,
futsal, yeah.
An outdoor gym set, everything.
Yeah, so that discovery I think is really important. Moving forward. But then individualized strength and fitness training program, I think this is really critical in terms of long-term success. A lot of kids that play one sport, they'll become so overdeveloped in certain aspects of their body and underdeveloped in other aspects of their body as well. So because they're still growing, basically some areas become way too dominant because they're just utilised all the time. So tennis is a real classical sport in that regard, because you're constantly using one side, the other side is underutilised, you're using the front side, not utilising the back side as much, then that can actually lead to injuries and burnout, or overuse injuries and burnout. Yeah, that's it for that one. Then seeking a PT or a coach that either train in a small group or one-on-one is critical to do safely, effectively in a supportive environment. I think this is critical to offload the kids to someone else to take the responsibility of this, because this is what we do, this is what we study, this is what we understand. We have the knowledge, the experience behind us. A lot of sports coaches will actually take ownership of this, and it really, I know the guys know it frustrates the heck out of me when I see sports coaches implementing strength training programs or like conditioning programs at training, and just it's absolute garbage, it's an absolute waste, and it's not taking into consideration the individual needs. They're not even assessing where they are, they're not assessing their progress as well, and how do you know what they're implementing is actually working? That's the critical part, and that's what we don't have enough of, is sports coaches that could be like, hey, sorry, I'm gonna hand this off to someone else, or I mean, sometimes PTs just don't assess, or they just discredit or discount kids. Like, oh yeah, just give them anything, they respond to everything. It's like, yes, but no at the same time. It's not exactly the case. Asking a PT or a strength coach or youth fitness specialist for experience as well, and then knowledge. Check out the social platforms and talk to other parents as well. I think it's a real critical part. We actually got a consult from a member of ours saying that she had a family friend who was looking for a PT for her son, and she was like, nah, come here instead. But part of the reason is because then you're going to have to go through the whole vetting process of finding PTs, if she was, but not all training is all made up to be the same. And like I said before, you always want to treat them as individualized programs. There's a lot of fitness programs out there. They do the teens, tweens, whatever you want to call it, and they're very generalized in nature. Like, I was part of a program growing up. I was like, I don't know, I was like 10 or something like that. I was the big kid and everyone was skinny and lean, and I'm like, why are we doing all this conditioning? I just want to throw around some tin. And it didn't really meet my needs, and then we just constantly changed until we started doing more weight training. Then that's when I really enjoyed it. And that's where understanding the kids' needs, what they like and dislike, and where they want to go is really important to understand. So not getting the kid to fit into the program, but making the program fit for the kid. It's a really important juxtaposition. Then if they're not really interested in weight training, and find a sport or physical activity they enjoy. What I finding now is we're hearing quite a few horror stories of kids leaving the clubs, sporting clubs, where they are, whether it's because they're not being promoted, because they're genuinely talented. The resources there are absolutely appalling. The case of really toxic culture as well. Obviously, it's happening more at a high level now. We're hearing more about it. We want to make sure that we're challenging our young ones in the most effective way. And if it comes to a PT or a coach or a club, the main thing is, are the coaches there for themselves, or the PT for themselves, or they're actually there to support your kid? That's the main thing. They have the right resources in place in order to deliver that.